Good morning, everybody. I didn't sleep well. How did you get on? You alright? Hope so. Sorry, let's do that Trump voice. Oh. Delicious Putin juice. Let's see, housekeeping. I might have to stop to type a bit because I got some work stuff going on. I did my second stream over on Tabletop Plus, which went pretty well. It's hosted on Plex Storm, so yeah, if you like a bit of the old with your gaming stuff, you might want to go and subscribe there or make an account there, though they're having all kinds of technical issues at the moment. Otherwise, not a lot. Working away, waiting on playtester feedback, that sort of thing. You know how it goes. So, yeah. A couple of quick bits that aren't really to do with proper news, I suppose. I think I found out where people have gotten so upset at Venger at. And it seems to be both his sort of somewhat naive but fluffy and well-intentioned all lives matter sort of commentary, and he did a post about Black Lives Matter, which is technically accurate in everything that he says, albeit with his own value judgments and everything, but people are taking that to be some sort of racist statement. But really what it boils down to is Black Lives Matter as an organised movement is Marxist and has a whole bunch of other wacky ideas, which is true if you go to the main Black Lives Matter site, if you do the slightest bit of research into its founding and so on. Of course, I don't necessarily think Marxism is necessarily bad. It's just a filter for examining the world through. That's really all it is. It's a mode of analysis of political, social, and economic systems. But obviously lots of other people will react badly to that terminology, but it is correct. Go and look it up. That's all I can say. He's a perfectly nice guy. I don't understand why he gets so much shit, but then I think that about myself, so perhaps I'm not the best person to ask. I don't know. The orcs thing is still rolling on and is now spread to drow and other representations. There's this weird idea that because the drow have black skin, that's necessarily a racial comment, or it ties into various things. Well, culturally, even perhaps in terms of evolutionary psychology, humans have an association with blackness, with blindness, with night, of these things being bad, and so we use them as shortcuts to describe things that are bad. The dark. All of that, and you see that across cultures, across the globe. But it doesn't mean that every single reference to something being black or dark is being racist, right? That's an absurd point of view to have, and yet here we are. So people want to change blacklist to some other term, and you see this along with everything else. This idea as well that somehow orcs as being evil beings, right? To move away from that, orcs as being evil beings is lazy writing. It is weird. It's more complex. It's more difficult in some ways to approach a game world or a fantasy world with a different metaphysical underlying reality to our own, where good and evil are objective things. And in fact, this is the background of the orc. Specifically with reference to Tolkien, they're more akin to demons or devils than much of anything else. Some are fallen elves, some are created for the purposes of evil, either by evil beings like Saruman or Morgoth, or they're evil beings in a world with objective evil, created for the purpose of doing evil, right? To me, it smacks, these days at least, more of laziness and mythological and fantasy literature, genre fiction, illiteracy to not understand that. But yeah, some things I had to get off my chest this morning. Alright, into the news then. Coronavirus seems to have displaced Black Lives Matter again, at least as far as British news goes. So we're opening, even though we probably shouldn't be, and we're likely to see a spike in cases in a week to 2 weeks. Scotland's doing well, the regions are doing well. It's England that doesn't seem to be doing as well, and I think that's probably down to the government, Dominic Cummings, and the rest of it. But we're shifting to a stance where local areas will be able to enforce lockdowns instead. So rather than the whole country necessarily being locked down all in one go, instead we're going to see more piecemeal lockdowns as and when the situation requires. So an example of that is Leicester, as Americans like to call it, where there has been a pretty big spike in local cases, and so they're talking about shutting that down. Some ways this is better, some ways it's not. You know, are we going to throw up borders around these towns and cities where these spikes occur? Probably not, I would think. So it's all going to be reliant on people's goodwill to still stay at home and not go out and not travel to other places, potentially carrying disease with them. And given what we've seen on the beaches and the protests and the anti-lockdown protests, the odds of people being good boys and girls and doing the right thing seems pretty small, pretty remote. But yeah, in some ways that's good. It's a more agile and sort of piecemeal approach, but I think the ship has sailed on people obeying the law at the moment. Keir Starmer's doing pretty well, both in terms of handling his own party and in terms of handling the Tories. It's nice to have effective opposition. It's just a pity he doesn't have more leverage. He can't use that position to do a great deal, but he is doing as well as can be expected in the circumstances. He was my choice for leader, even though he's of the Labour Party, even though he's not really left enough for my politics. I felt that Corbyn represented a necessary shift to the left in UK politics. Hopefully Starmer won't creep quite as far back to the right as Blair did. I think that would also be a mistake. But he does seem to be doing pretty well. His lawyerly skills seem to suit Prime Minister's questions, particularly when there aren't a bunch of braying Tories right behind Boris Johnson. But it seems to be pretty good, all things considered. And he does seem to have Boris on the back foot. And so it seems that Boris is acting very reactively, promising money here and there. One example of this is £1 billion to rebuild crumbling schools. Probably not as much as you think. How many UK schools are there? Number of schools in the United Kingdom. 32,770 schools. So if we take that 1 billion and we divide it by that 32,770, that's only about £30,000 per school. Now, how far do you think £30,000 per school is going to go? Of course, some of them won't need as much money, which means more money will be available to others. But by and large, you think about how far £30,000 would go on, say, putting an extension on your house or doing much needed repair. You know, just replacing your boiler will cause multiple thousands of pounds, right? Yeah. So it looks good, I guess, as a headline, and I'm sure the Mail will run with it, but Boris does seem to be acting very reactively, in fear, running, I think, is the way it goes. I'll get to questions and stuff at the end, you know how this works. Scientists have come forward. Many of them have formed their own sort of independent advisory groups to the government now, because they feel that the government can't be trusted to give decent information. But they're warning that we're right on a knife edge, and we probably shouldn't have eased lockdown or anything yet. It's way too soon. Excuse me. He said appropriately, coughing. So they're warning that, you know, we're right on the edge, whether it's below the R rate's below 1 or not, and after everything that happened at the beaches and so on, you know, like I said, a week or two, we're going to see a big spike. It's almost certain, especially the protests and everything as well, right? But scientists are warning that we shouldn't be doing this easing right now, because we're right on that edge. We really need to secure it and get some sort of safety in terms of the R rate before we do anything like that. And they're being really weirdly cautious about the kinds of language they're using here. So they're trying not to condemn all the people that went to the beach, while at the same time condemning the protesters and the pride type people. Yeah, Bojo did that embarrassing stunt where he did push-ups. It's and we still don't have properly accurate reporting on exactly how much damage Corona has done. If you want that information, you need to look at the excess deaths, because the Corona rate is almost certainly more, possibly as much as twice as high as the official reports. The cases, even more so, out of step with reality. So we really have no idea. It's going to take some kind of multi-year investigation once all this is even over, if it ever ends, because there's been other bad news saying that you may not get immunity, you might just get additional protection from any vaccine or previous exposure. Yeah, I don't know, it's all screwed. Everyone's gone loony. There's an interesting turn of events in America in particular, in that the worst of the coronavirus outbreak in America was largely confined to the more built-up cities and the coastal states, right, for a very long time. And they struggled because America has no decent healthcare system. The federal government wasn't taking much of a lead, was leaving it very much to the locals, right? It just hasn't gone particularly well for a whole variety of reasons, even in states that took it seriously and enforced the lockdown. But it has managed to infiltrate many of the flyover states now, the red states, the more Republican states, and it is well out of hand there, even as the coastal states begin to move into more of a recovery and unlock stage on a more justified basis. It's the Republican arenas that are really getting hit at this point. And they're getting hit at a time that is closer to the election in November, and in states that have put a lot of political capital on playing down the virus, where conspiracy theories and defiance and protests are much more common, protests against the lockdown. So it'll be interesting to see, because it means that the aftermath is going to be a lot more fresh and a lot more obvious in the Republican states, which are home to more Trump voters than they are elsewhere. However, yeah, I'm trying to sort of temper my, not excitement, but temper my analysis there, because the more it gets worse there, the more I'm seeing on my sort of normie feed on Facebook that people don't give a shit. They're still wanting to go out without masks. Shops are saying, don't wear a mask in here, stay home. Yeah, the stupidity is real. So I guess we'll see what effect it has. I mean, I would have said before all the BLM protests and so on that maybe the sheer amount of deaths amongst Trump's normal demographic of old white people. I'm not being racist, that is the demographic. Yeah, that might tip the election. Now, who knows? I'm not quite sure what to make of this story, right? So sticking with Trump and his electoral chances, he retweeted a video that included one of his supporters shouting "white power," which on the one hand, fits with what we know or think we know about Trump, in that he is probably pretty racist, and and I guess it helps prove, if any more proof was needed, that Trump does handle his own account and everything. And it's yet another blunder. Did he know? Did he even watch the video? Did he just see Trump supporters clash with and retweet it then? Who knows? But a lot of people have capitalized on this to say that he's finally outed himself in an irrefutable way as a racist. And of course the other side's all out in force, providing excuses for him. And this just kind of encapsulates things, right? It's probably just that he's a dumb motherfucker. Whatever his particular views on race or whatever else might be, he probably didn't even look at it. He probably just saw Trump supporter and retweeted it. But both sides are completely deranged on the issue. And that's where we're at. There's no communication. There's no possible middle ground. If I speak to people who hate him, I mean, I hate him, and say, this doesn't really prove anything. It's probably a mistake. He probably didn't even read it. The man's an idiot and has no filter, right? They will decry then me as a racist who's providing cover for Trump. And if I go to the other side and I say, this is probably a mistake. He's very old. He's clearly suffering from dementia and other problems related to cognitive decline. Probably didn't even watch it. The people on the other side will then have a go at you for even suggesting that he might be racist or is racist, but that this doesn't prove anything, or that he quite clearly has dementia. It's quite interesting. We're going to have two doddering old senile farts running for election in the States. So it's not even really about the figurehead. I think you need to look more to the people who are around them, who are actually going to be doing anything. Right? So they're gonna be meat puppets. It's gonna be Weekend at Bernie's, whichever person wins. So sorry, work person getting back to me. Right, there's more casualties amongst Britain's civil service. There's been several fairly high profile, as much as the civil service has any kind of profile at all. There's been several high profile resignations over the last while. Lots of them really don't seem to like Cummings. Others have been manoeuvred out or briefed against, and Cummings seems to be pressing forward despite his controversies and despite being a horrible bastard and corrupt as fuck. He seems to be pressing ahead with his attempts to reform the civil service and so on. What he's got on Johnson and others, I don't know. But our top civil servant, Sir Mark Sedwill, has confirmed that he's going to be standing down. So there's going to be less and less apparatus left to keep a check on Cummings and his cronies and associates, which makes us more and more vulnerable, and there's basically nothing we can do about it for another 3 to 4 years. We're losing experienced and effective people from the sort of below stairs side of government. And yeah, the only ray of hope we've got is Starmer, who isn't as radical as he would probably need to be to counter what's been going on, because Cummings and so on is, they are fairly radical people. And not all of their ideas are terrible, but the execution seems to be pretty terrible. So, Rebecca Long-Bailey, didn't she stand for leader? Anyway, she's part of the sort of Corbynite rump that's left in Parliament and so on. One of the things that's shown that Starmer isn't someone with whom to fuck is the fact that he fired her. Why did he fire her? So she's part of the Corbynite left, so he's probably looking for a bit of an excuse. But there has also been a huge problem with anti-Semitism on the further left of the Labour Party and the sort of left-wing movement in the UK as a whole. Why is there a problem? Because there's age-old stereotypes about capitalists which have a significant overlap with stereotypes about Jews, about them being wealthy and in control of society and somehow corrupting society and being the caricature of the arch-capitalist. So there's that side of things, and then there's also the fact that Israel is a pretty shitty place that does a lot of pretty shitty things, unfortunately. Israelis, many of them absolutely lovely, but their government and its track record and its sort of apartheid-light system, it's just the way it operates, the way it does things is extremely dodgy, and there's a lot of valid criticism from the left towards Israel, but it does provide cover for a lot of people who are genuinely, virulently anti-Semitic. In fact, this has come up quite a lot in regards to the Black Lives Matter protest. And this was a huge problem for Corbyn. It was a way in which Labour could constantly be attacked and accused of being hypocrites because they're pretty racist if you're Jewish, a lot of them, or at least it seems that way. And it's very easy to reframe criticism of Israel as being anti-Semitism. And this provided an opportunity for Starmer to show that he was taking it in a different direction, that he was going to take it seriously, and Long-Bailey seems to have been the first sort of really visible casualty of that. That's all background. What did she do? She retweeted an article by someone that involved an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that police had been trained by Israeli intelligence services and military in the chokeholds that led to the death of George Floyd. So it's all very convoluted. It's also untrue. Police forces haven't engaged in that kind of training. So it's a bit of a conspiracy theory. It's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, or more accurately, an anti-Israel conspiracy theory, but a conspiracy theory nonetheless, and one that's very popular in anti-Semitic circles. And this is where the far left and the far right overlap when they really shouldn't. And it also makes it very difficult to criticize Israel because it gets reframed as racism. So he didn't really, I don't think he really had much of a choice, but apparently he did give her the chance to retract the tweet and all the rest of it, and she wouldn't. So it's not only a matter of, look, you put out this thing that can uncharitably be interpreted as anti-Semitic. It's that, I, the leader of the party, asked you to deal with this in a sensible way, and you wouldn't, and you defied me, and it's an authoritarian leadership style, but given the context, I think it's understandable, and that really left him with little choice but to fire her, which accomplished several goals. I think it helped remove the Corbynite rump from access to power, is one thing. It gave Keir Starmer an example to point at, to say, look, I'm taking anti-Semitism seriously. It just kind of stamped his authority on the party. So I think it's a combination of reasons. I don't think it's entirely invalid, the criticism of her, that this is anti-Semitic and a problem. But it's also a virtue signalling device, if you will. But conspiracy theories are shit. Some reason I opened that article twice. Back to coronavirus. Singapore. Lots of people are holding Singapore up as this big example of the best way to handle things. Singapore is very clean. It's very modern. It runs very well. The people do the right thing, but it is a soft dictatorship. It's a high-tech soft dictatorship. So I don't think the praise towards Singapore is particularly justified. You can trade some freedom for security, at least temporarily, but in Singapore it's like the fines are ridiculous for just dropping gum on the ground or whatever else. It's perhaps a more physical expression of the kind of world we all seem to live in now, where everyone is constantly watching each other for any kind of social transgression and then punishing them. Singapore is in many ways, even more so than China, a sort of ultimate expression of that. But one of the things they're doing now is they're handing out coronavirus tracing devices. These are little Bluetooth devices, so you don't have to put any apps or anything on your phone. You just carry this device around and it pings people, records who you've been in contact with a level of anonymity added on top to an extent. And then if you catch the coronavirus, they can download the information from this dongle, and then they can get in touch with everybody who you've gotten in a certain amount of distance of. So far so good, but all a bit Big Brother. And then, as we've discovered with our own UK app and with other apps, there's a matter of privacy and data security and anonymity here. It would be relatively easy to identify who you were, even without access to this information, just by backtracing, using Wi-Fi and various other things. You can already zero in on people quite a lot with that. I was watching some YouTube videos last night by a guy who tracks down tech support scammers, and the amount of information that he can get just by your Wi-Fi, and the amount of access he can get to the systems of the scammers who scam people through fake virus alerts and so on. Good for him, woohoo, fighting back against scam artists who are ripping people off. But it's also sinister how much information he can get and how easy it was for him to get into CCTV systems so he can actually see these scam call centers in India and so on. So I think we do have to worry about data and privacy. So yeah, it's a concern, and we shouldn't hold Singapore or China necessarily up as the perfect model that so many people seem to think they are, because their effectiveness is reliant on their authoritarianism. There has to be a balance somewhere. Do I want to talk about this story or not? It's a story from the BBC about a guy. It's a computer programmer. He happens to be black, and he feels like he was accidentally hired. So the whole story is basically about supposed racial issues in programming. Tech is pretty ruthlessly meritocratic, which doesn't set out to exclude anybody. In fact, I've found, and friends who've worked in the tech field have found, that they're actually pretty goddamn diverse. Not so many West Indians here in the UK, but a lot of Pakistanis, Middle Easterners, Asian people. There's a lot of people from communities that value education particularly highly. Perhaps are even a bit too vicious and parental bullying about that. And a lot of people from the majority, just because it's the majority. It's this idea that people are necessarily being singled out or not given jobs or only accidentally given jobs. It doesn't really sit true to me. I mean, the fact that there's so many Asians and South Asians in programming may well be down to a positive or patronizing stereotype of people. I mean, everyone knows that Indians are supposed to be good at tech and Asians are supposed to be good at maths and all the rest of it. So that may be a kind of prejudice in and of itself, but you just tie yourself in knots if you start thinking about this too much. And this guy's an American as well, so I don't know why it's on the BBC site particularly, because it's not that relevant to the UK experience, really. Actually, that's why I clicked on the article, because I don't think that the American minority experience travels that well. And I think there's a lot of issues where the United States confuses race issues with class issues, but not entirely. But the paradigm everywhere else outside the US is very different, and it doesn't make sense to use the same kind of tools and thoughts and modes of analysis in, say, the UK as it does in the US. We don't have the same legacy of slavery, despite imperialism, despite the transatlantic slave trade and everything else. We have a very different relationship to it. And our immigration wounds are much newer, the 50s and 60s onwards, really. So why are they talking to an American about this experience without specifically talking about the American experience? I don't know. It doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. But I doubt anyone was accidentally hired. I was talking earlier about Boris going off on one and just sort of reacting by saying, £1 billion for schools or something. What a wizard prank that'll be. And all the rest of them. That's the whole government, particularly at the Bojo level, seems to be really reactive. Now, we came out of austerity, then the coronavirus hit us, right? And there's various other long-term issues going on, like green issues, climate change issues, and so on. And we're probably about to enter at least a recession, if not a depression, though it is likely to be relatively short-term, going on historical trends, but that's no guarantee. Economics is voodoo. Nobody understands how it works, really. Anyone who tries to tell you that they do is selling you something. But it's clear that they don't feel they can go back to austerity, which is good, but I don't believe them, and I don't think they'll do what's actually needed, which is massive societal investment, particularly in education, training, deprived areas, and so on, basically providing people opportunities. I doubt they're going to go for that. So when they say not the austerity of 10 years ago, I think there's still going to be austerity, just not as deep or as bad. And I think it would be politically suicidal to do things like, say, cutting expenditure in healthcare and so on, at least in broad numerical terms. But they might leave it the same, they might stop any more pay rises, that sort of thing, which is an effective cut because inflation is a thing, but still, they're making noises that are going to fool people, probably. So basically, I don't believe him, but I still think they're being very reactive. But they're still pressing ahead with Brexit, which is going to be a huge economic hit and is going to worsen and deepen any problems that we do suffer from coronavirus, unless they're going to push to the last minute and then suddenly and abruptly change their mind and say, yes, we're going to extend the transition period and the negotiation period, and they're just holding out because they don't want the political backlash that's going to come with that, or they're waiting for the EU to make it seem that they're leaving them no choice. I see far more humanity and humility from the EU side than I do from our negotiators. And latest polling suggests that it's now over 57% of people want to remain in the EU now. And it's even higher, the amount of people that want to extend the transition period or extend the negotiation period because of the Rona. And that's a sensible, sane position to take. And a lot of those people are otherwise pro-Brexit. And yet, here we go. Our economy is not only committing seppuku in terms of Brexit, but it's also getting a kicking at the same time. Green issues. a new report suggests that we need an extra 14 billion over the next few years to prepare and insulate and to make the commitments that we need for infrastructure for electric cars, and to ensure that we meet our CO2 targets. But those targets may be being dropped, and I suspect that as economies tank around the world, we'll see a lot less keenness to deal with long-term problems like climate change. Unfortunately, the sooner you do these things, the cheaper it turns out to be, and you could use greening the economy as the kind of stimulus that we need to avoid a depression or a recession or to climb out of it quickly. Unfortunately, with right-wing populist governments in America, the UK, Brazil, India, quite a lot of big, important economies, for one reason or another, sadly, I think we're going to be stuck. We already talked about Leicester. Right, so returning to some of the stuff I was talking about earlier, this kind of reactive stupidity around supposed race issues and the lack of understanding of them. I briefly touched it again on the stuff going on in regard to D&D. So lots of TV series are being pulled or episodes are being pulled. There's been a lot of talk about changing who voice acts now on various things. The Simpsons has pledged to no longer use white actors to voice people of colour, which is going to be awkward because most of their characters are yellow. We came so far in race doesn't matter. It's not an issue. Anyone of any colour can accomplish anything, and there were still a lot, there were still places to go. But this kind of shit really sort of centres and prioritises an irrelevant characteristic. It makes no odds to who or what you are, the amount of melanin in your skin, or geographically wherever you happen to have won or lost the birth lotto. Nationalism's never made any sense to me. Racial pride's never made any sense to me. Gender pride has never made any sense to me. Sexuality pride has never particularly made any sense to me. And yet the new left really centres race, and the far right really centres race as if it means something, and it's just this total outside context problem for me, and I feel that it's intensely regressive. And this is not what people are asking for or wanting, right? They don't want Apu to be voiced by an Indian actor. They want police reform. They want social investment. In the States, they want, decent, publicly available medical care. Nobody's asking for these things, and yet they're happening over and over and over again. The exception, interestingly, is anime, where they're not demanding that everyone be voice acted by someone of Japanese descent. Japanese are apparently white now as well. There was an interesting article about that over the weekend. No, they're demanding more diversity in anime. So they want to bring in different voice actors of many, many different colours. Not Japanese, it seems, for the most part, or of Japanese descent. And they're also applying pressure to Japanese animation houses to be more sensitive to Western concerns and to diversify their casts. I'm not sure that's a good idea, because the Japanese anime depiction of black people looks a lot like the old racist caricatures. I don't think they necessarily mean it that way, but that's the way it often looks. It's even crept into Pokemon. But it's just all this empty, meaningless gesturing, and that's using up a lot of goodwill, I think, that could otherwise be channeled into genuine reform. And centering race around reform and other issues instantly makes a lot of people wary or reluctant to back it up. And this is using up a lot of social capital that could otherwise be used towards making meaningful change, I think. This just seems pointless and absurd and designed to alienate people, like a lot of the language and issues around all of this do a lot. I don't know, man. It just seems so completely pointless. Right, let's look at the chat and see what anyone has to say. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe and hit the little bell. Even if you're subscribed to my main channel, you should subscribe here, because this is a separate channel. Some people don't seem to realise that. Right, let's look from the top. Adam says good morning. Good morning, Adam. Hat Manan says morning. Morning, Hat. Morning, Ben. Adam says Bojo plus Voldemort seem to be concentrating more power in their hands, with Mark Sedwell being forced out. Not exactly sure what he does. Is he basically Sir Humphrey? Yeah, he's basically Sir Humphrey. He's like the nominal head of the whole civil service. And yeah, him being essentially pushed out is concerning. I mean, you can understand why a lot of these people are leaving the civil service. They're being politicized and made visible in a way that stops them doing their job and goes against the traditions and history of it all. And they're seeing everything being torn down around their ears, and they're being bullied by people like Priti Patel. Yeah, it's understandable why they would feel that they should just fuck off. It'd be hard to work or to live in that environment, I think, so it's completely understandable. But yeah, it's worrying, and they're combining departments that shouldn't be combined. And yeah, we need radical change, but we don't need the radical change that Cummings seems to be doing. Even though some of his ideas are good, he doesn't seem to be implementing those ideas. I don't think I've seen him even try to implement some of his good ideas. So, I mean, if you go and read his blogs and things, I mean, they're internal, pretentious rubbish for the most part. But there's kernels of some good ideas in there. But he just seems to be riding roughshod over everyone. Adam also says, Starmer chucked someone out for anti-Semitism who'd done nothing wrong. It's my choice too, out of the bunch we had. The usual criticising the actions of the Israeli state is anti-Semitism rubbish. I think I covered that, hopefully, and gave the full context. She's not entirely innocent. She's not entirely guilty. But I think it was a confluence of things. Labour's previous issues with anti-Semitism, Starmer needing to stamp his authority, an opportunity to get rid of some of the Corbynite leftovers. And it is more anti-Semitic than it is necessarily criticism of the Israeli state. But more importantly, I think, is that it's not true. And there was no apology, no attempt to find a sort of halfway house with the leader. She just kind of defied him. And he would have appeared weak at a time when he really needs to appear strong against the government. So there's a kernel of truth to the anti-Semitism, because it was centered around conspiracy theories that are popular amongst anti-Semites. But I think it's more to do with leadership strength and trying to put that whole anti-Semitism smear behind them, I think. Ben says that 1 billion for schools we were talking about is only 3 and a bit months of the savings we get from the money we're not sending to the EU, except that there was a report on that. Brexit is costing us way more. Let's see if I can find it quickly. Brexit is costing us, costing the UK report. I can't immediately see the article I was looking for, but at this point we've paid more in associated costs with Brexit than we spent in our entire lifetime in the EU. So yeah, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? Adam says, I think we saw that 350 million a week rather than month on the side of a bus somewhere. Yeah. And like I pointed out, that 1 billion for schools sounds like a lot. It's not. I think we saw that also with a pledge they made to mental health funding. It sounds like a lot until you figure out how many people need support and how little extra it actually counts as. when we were talking about infections, people going to the beach, the protests and so on. I think that's what Ben's referring to here when he says, well, at least the protests ended racism. You will never end racism. You can get rid of racism in, well, mostly in the police force and things like that. But like I said in that video recently, to understand what systemic or institutional racism was, I had to grok, I had to understand that it's not actually racism. What they mean is that choices that are made, that can be made by people who don't have a racist bone in their body for completely non-racist reasons, can end up having a racialized effect because they affect certain communities disproportionately. Like if you were to cut funding to education in urban areas for some reason, it would be a tremendously bad idea. But you could call that institutionally racist here in the UK because it's in the cities where the vast majority of BAME people live, right? So it wouldn't be a racist decision, it would be an anti-urban, anti-metropolitan sort of decision in this hypothetical, but they would call it racist, right? Even though nobody involved need have any prejudice on the basis of race, that wasn't the target of it, it would still have a disproportionate effect, so they call it systemic or institutional racism, even though there's no racism involved. It's like voter ID laws, right? I think the Republican Party knows in the US and the Conservatives in the UK that introducing that sort of law or requirement would have a disproportionate effect on BAME people and thereby suppress the more left-wing metropolitan vote, right? And I suspect they have racialized motives in the case of the Republicans in the US, but it's not actually a racist policy, but it would disproportionately affect people from minority ethnic communities, so people call it systemic racism, which isn't the right word, right? Because people will look at that and say, "What? That's not racist. It's not saying voter ID only for blacks. So what's the issue here, right?" It's the left has a real communication problem, and I think that's because it's ended up in these kind of academic echo chambers where they all speak their own jargon and they have no idea how to communicate properly with the outside world. Someone from Indonesia, I think, or possibly India, says that they're Batman. And Ben asks, which one? Kilmer. Kilmer makes a better blunt man than he does Batman. God, that poor sod getting so fat. Adam says, oh, actually, that's ironic that Kilmer got so fat, because wasn't he in the last movie with The Island of Dr. Moreau, the version with my brain is not working. I couldn't sleep last night. Marlon Brando. He was in one of the last films Marlon Brando ever did, which was a version of The Island of Dr. Moreau that was not very good at all. And then he seems to have taken on the spirit of Marlon Brando and gotten as Chonky Boy as him. This is unfortunate, poor sod. Adam says, I don't know, I think this privacy battle is already lost. A telescreen isn't on our wall, it's in our pocket. I'm a programmer and I have no clue. Black boxes in black boxes on my phone, etc. Yeah. And people are willing to do it for convenience and various other things. You know, I'm not hugely techy, but I was involved in the tech industry, and my worse half is in the tech industry. But, you know, we kind of knowingly still do the things that we know will invade our privacy to an extent. And that's us, who are pretty tech savvy. It's... to most people, most of this stuff, this technology might as well be magic, right? And yeah, they've got no idea how it works. What What bothers me, I think, is that all this wealth is being created off the backs of our data, and we're not really getting a commensurate amount of value from it. Now, if you set up a social network that would somehow share the wealth that was being generated from it, that, I think, is something that could beat Twitter or Facebook. If there was a way that you could sort of buy in, right, verify your identity and certain other information about you, advertisers would be very interested in that information. But if you went in with your eyes open and were compensated for it in a reasonable way, if the company, say, took 50% of the value of the information that you produce and paid you out 50% of the value of the information that you produce, yeah, that would be a fair, meaningful way to go about it, I think. And that might be a way for a new social network to kind of elbow in. The only thing that would worry me about that is once you add money to the issue, it attracts even more scam artists and problem people. And I think you would also see the social media panopticon and the way everyone sort of informs on each other. I think you would see that ramp up because people wouldn't want to risk their income by not reporting something that was rude or lewd or crude or politically charged or whatever. So I don't know. It's the bare bones of an idea. Probably an idea worth an awful lot of money, but one that I can't follow through on. But, yeah. Ben says, anecdotally, worked in tech for 16 years. In all my jobs, the environments have all been diverse. Same, though I haven't worked in an office in 15 years. Adam says, tech is meritocratic to a point until you get old. Then it becomes wildly discriminatory in a lot of places. Older people pushed down, replaced with younger ones, etc. Sometimes that's fair, sometimes that's not. So much infrastructure and so on is built on older systems that I think there's increasing value in being someone that knows old programming languages or has familiarity with the older systems. But yeah, a lot of these tech companies do want younger people. And it's entirely reasonable that they do, because they are more adaptable, they're able to learn, they're able to mold them to the environment, and also they can employ them for less. And they're more willing to work longer hours and so on, which I think Ben went into beyond that. Yeah, they expect a lot of overtime crunch and so on, and older people with families and so on are less likely to do that. But that's part of what makes it meritocratic, I suppose, is people willing to do the work. But, yeah. Adam says, the EU leaders are getting tired of being pissed about, it seems, and who can blame them? Yeah, I'm surprised they're not more pissed, though. I think they are concerned about the impact on the British people, though they have to prioritise EU citizens, obviously. And I think they're concerned about that, which is why they're not being more bullish and forceful. But it's like trying to negotiate with a child who's having a tantrum in a supermarket. Yeah, if you stop crying and kicking, Tarquin, then I will get you a chocolate at the checkout. Yeah, it feels like we're not the adults, which is yeah, Britain used to be seen as a sort of steady pair of hands, level-headed. It's all gone. You know, like respect and fear of America, it's just gone. Ben says maybe it depends on the tech field. I worked in games about 10 years ago, and the average age was very young. I worked in tech support initially, which was kind of entry level into the tech industry. My worse half has worked peripherally in games journalism and now works in voice over IP. Seems to have a very diverse technical department. The younger people do still tend to come in through tech support. So, Sonic says, morning, sorry I'm late. Hi Sonic, I'm leaving in a minute, so yeah, you can always watch back the replay. Ben says, obesity is the least of Kilmer's worries, Grim. Have you seen him recently? Had cancer and is now unable to speak properly after surgery. The last thing I've seen him in is Blunt and Chronic. That section of the Jay and Silent Bob reboot, which was actually quite fun. And You should watch it. Yeah, and he didn't say anything, but he was playing Silent Bob, so I didn't really make anything of it. But yeah, he did get chonky. Michael says, the neo-progressive left is very bad at communicating coherently because they're ideologically incoherent and disconnected to the hard-learned lessons of the old left. Yeah, I can agree with all of that. I think the left is always an alliance of people with different ideas, whereas the right tends to be more of a homogenous block, which isn't to say that there aren't divisions and so on on the right, it's just they're more pronounced on the left. So that's part of the problem. And I think this insular academic bubble and language doesn't help. And yeah, they don't seem to have learned at all from history, which is going to be an increasing problem moving forward in the world, I rather suspect. Right, I should probably go. Was there anything else I wanted to cover quickly or talk about? No. So yeah, mostly I'm waiting on playtest feedback. The first sort of mini supplement of material from the game I do with the Pawn People will be out soon. Hope to have Grimdark out soon once I get the playtest information back. What else is going on? Not a great deal. Here's hoping I can stay awake today and get a proper night's sleep. Yeah, again, don't forget to subscribe and like and all that jazz, and remember this is a different channel to my main one, and I'm gonna head off. So take care everyone, have a good day. Zang, stay safe, wear a mask.